Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session of the day for this Caregiver Day for 24 Hours of Rare. We are so honored to have Carrie Leeson Beavers with us. She is the National Development Manager and Family Support Manager for the Alston Syndrome in the UK, and we hope that you enjoy this presentation on care perspective. Carrie, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Kerry, and I'm from a charity in the UK called Alston Syndrome UK. Today, I'm going to give you a carer perspective. I have a 19-year-old son who's diagnosed with Alston syndrome. I'll talk to you a little bit about the condition to explain some of the symptoms and then some of the challenges, really, of managing such a complex and rare condition. I'll also talk to you a bit about the charity and the work that we're involved in. So here's an overview of what I'll be talking about today. So I'll talk you through our journey as a family. I'll talk you through Alston Syndrome UK and then how we managed to get highly specialised multidisciplinary clinics in the UK for Alston Syndrome. I'll talk to you a little bit about the impact of Alston Syndrome on my son and on me as a carer and on our family. And then I'll talk to you about how we work in partnership with clinicians and researchers and the work we've been involved in how to involve patients in research and how to really understand the role, what's important to patients and their families. So I think it's always really important to understand the perspective of families and what they're going through, but then it's also important to highlight how we can work in partnership with researchers and clinicians, really, to develop the very best research and research that's going to make a difference and make an impact on people's lives. I want to introduce you to my son, Keon. So as I said, Keon's now 19 years old. Keon had a very difficult start in life. As you can see from the picture on the left on the screen, Keon was in intensive care for quite some time as a baby. He's lived with, he lives with one of the most rare and complex conditions in the world. But as you can see, he's doing extremely well at the minute. So I'll talk you a little bit through. I'll take you through each stage of our life. Starting off with my pregnancy. So I had a very healthy pregnancy and everything was well at birth. Keon was my first child. At 3 weeks old, Keon collapsed in heart failure, and at that point we was told that it was some kind of virus that had entered his heart. Luckily, he recovered after a couple of weeks, and he was released from intensive care, and we were able to go home. But then at 4 months old, he collapsed again in heart failure, and he was diagnosed at that point with dilated cardiomyopathy. We were in and out of hospital for quite a while then, and Keon was on lots of different medication, and obviously it was quite a worrying time because of how quickly Keon deteriorated when he became unwell. At 6 months old, he was diagnosed with cone dystrophy, nystagmus and photophobia. We noticed that his eyes were wobbling, and he was quite sensitive to light. So we had a referral to an ophthalmologist who at that point registered him as partially sighted. So because 2 of his major organs had been affected within that first year of life, that prompted a referral to a genetics department. And they took blood samples from me and from Keon, and it took, we were told at that point it would take quite some time for results to come back. We had numerous hospital admissions with chest infections and pneumonia, and we were eventually had an appointment with the genetics team who told us it could be one of 2 different conditions. And I remember being given the possibilities on a scrap piece of paper and told to go home and wait for the results, which could take up to a year to come back. As many parents do, I then turned to Google, and at that time it was very scary looking at the possibilities of what this condition could be. I thought it was bad enough that my son had to go through heart failure and numerous hospital admissions, and then to be told he was losing his sight. Then to think and to look at these conditions and think, gosh, it could get much worse was very scary. So when he was about 12 to 18 months old, I found a website and a charity called Alström Syndrome UK. And I really felt at that point that those symptoms matched my son's symptoms. So I contacted the charity and they were able to offer me support, and they referred me to Birmingham Children's Hospital, where they also did further genetic testing on my son, and they were able to make the diagnosis of Alström syndrome. But then over the next few years, we had a very challenging time. So my son was prone to obesity. When I stopped breastfeeding at around 13, when he was about 13, 14 months old, he began to put on weight rapidly. And because we knew that that was part of the condition, we had, my son had to have a very, strict diet with as much exercise as possible, which is very difficult with a child with a visual impairment. He was then registered as severely sight impaired, and he lost his sight completely at the age of 15, which is a very difficult, it's never a good time to lose your sight. But going through puberty and at that age, he found that an extremely difficult time. My son also has severe hearing loss, so he wears hearing aids in both ears, and he's got a severe to profound hearing loss. He also has scoliosis, and he needed to have surgery on his spine, which again was a very difficult time because of the risk of having a general anaesthetic with all of Keon's other health complications. Very scary time, but he came through that fabulously, and they were able to insert rods in his spine so that they could straighten, and obviously it's made a lot of difference to his posture and the pain that he used to have in his back. He's been under a respiratory specialist for many years, so he had recurring chest infections as a baby and was constantly on antibiotics. He's needed input from physiotherapy and occupational therapists, and he was diagnosed with social and emotional developmental delay. Many people who have a child with Alström syndrome often question whether their children have got autism, and it's very difficult to determine whether a child's got autistic traits or whether it's as a result of having sensory impairment, because there's some similarities. So we went through a very detailed assessment process, and the diagnosis of social and emotional developmental delay was finally given. We've recently had a referral to neurology. I've often wondered whether my son did have some neurological issues because he stopped breathing for quite a long time when he was a baby, but I didn't feel at that time that it was right to do an MRI scan because I was worried about him having a general anaesthetic. But then he started to develop some absence seizures within the last 12 to 18 months, which has prompted that referral to neurology. Things look okay at the minute, but we're just waiting for further follow-up. My son's also got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and trying to stop him from drinking alcohol isn't very easy at 19 years old. So that's quite a challenging thing for Keon, but also as a mum to try and give him that freedom to live his life. But also I have the worry of the health complications as well, and wanting him to have as a healthy lifestyle as possible. But Keon, he just wants to have fun and live his life. He's insulin resistant and prone to diabetes. So there's a long list there, and unfortunately I'm sure that there is more to come. Alström syndrome is an ultra-rare, recessively inherited condition, and it's progressive. So things are likely to deteriorate over time, and that it's taken some time to get our head around that as a family. But we do what we can to live our life and to live our best life. We have the challenges, but we also have a great deal of fun as well. I just want to tell you a little bit about the charity. So when I first joined the charity, it was like a lifeline for me, and I'm fortunate now to actually work for Alström Syndrome UK. So I joined the charity when Keon was about 3 years old, and later started to work from them. So Alström Syndrome UK was established in 1998 by two parents in Devon, and we were instrumental in getting the highly specialised multidisciplinary clinics for all patients in the UK that are diagnosed with the condition, and I'll talk through the clinics in more detail a little later. So we only have 86 cases currently on our UK database, and as I say, it's extremely rare and complex, and it's also a ciliopathy. So there are a group of conditions known as ciliopathies, and we work closely with them. We offer support throughout the patient journey, which is often complex and unpredictable. There are many similarities in the experiences of families, but every family is unique and their experience is very individual, and we try and adapt our support to what the family needs, But hopefully, from the experience that I've been through and some of the other members of staff within Alström Syndrome UK, we know some of the battles that we've had to go through for our children. So we've had to challenge health, education, social care, benefits system. And what we try and do as a charity is to provide as much support as we can to prevent other patients going through some of the very difficult and complex things that we've been through as well, that we've been through. So we offer emotional and practical support. So we can offer financial support to families in terms of grants and equipment and things like that. But we also provide the emotional support to all families. And we do a lot of work to improve health and well-being. So there is no cure for Alström syndrome. The only difference really that we can make is to try and provide a very active lifestyle and appropriate diet, because it has been shown that with very good diet and exercise that we can prolong life. So it does make a real difference. We always look to improve our knowledge and understanding and to raise awareness to improve the understanding of others. I'm sure everybody of the audience here understands how difficult it can be when many clinicians and people that we come into contact with on a daily basis understand very little about the condition, and parents are forever needing to retell their story, and patients themselves retell their story time and time again. So we do what we can to raise awareness and to upskill the health, education, social care workforce to be able to support families appropriately. And we've also developed a global patient registry so that we can get a real true picture of the prevalence of Alström syndrome in the world. We've got a very complex database in the UK, but what we want to do is to understand more about that global picture and understand more about the condition as well, that hopefully then will aid future research. So, as I say, we've got highly specialised multidisciplinary clinics in the UK. So it's felt that Alström syndrome is too complex for local health teams to manage that condition. So we have centres of excellence in Birmingham in the UK, one for children and young people and one for adults. When my son was a child, this is the team of specialists that we would see on one visit, one clinic visit. So we would stay overnight in a hotel, and we would have a full day of clinics where we would see an endocrinologist, a cardiologist, a dietitian, a physiotherapist, a diabetes nurse, a clinic coordinator, a geneticist, an ophthalmologist, an audiologist, a transition coordinator, and the research team. So that's a lot of people to see within one day, and with that comes a lot of different tests as well. So Keon would have, in one day, Keon would have blood tests. He'd have height and weight. He'd have blood pressure. He'd have an echocardiogram, an ECG. He'd have an eye test. He'd have a hearing test. And in many ways, that sounds a lot for a young person to go through in one day, but actually being seen by a team of specialists that understood the condition and getting everything done in one place was so much better than going from one person to another and having many different local appointments and being seen by specialists that didn't really understand the condition and didn't understand how the way they treated their part of the condition, whether that be for the heart or the liver or whatever, they didn't fully understand how that could impact on every other organ in the body and on the condition as a whole. But being seen by that multidisciplinary team who then spoke together and made a plan on where we go next and which treatments my son should be put on, gave me a lot of reassurance as a parent, and actually being able to be surrounded by other patients attending that clinic as well, with other families who understood what it was like to experience and to live with Alström syndrome was really good from a family perspective as well. So as a charity, we do a lot of work around transition and transfer. When we build up our confidence with a paediatric team, to then the thoughts then of moving on to an adult team can be quite daunting for any family. And I know for my son, he really developed a lot of confidence in his team of specialists, and he didn't like the idea of moving. With the local teams that we were under, we often found that we had even though we were seen in Birmingham, we did have local specialists involved as well. But those services tended to drop off as my son then transferred to the adult service. But we did a lot of work in the Alström service with a transition coordinator So my son was supported by a transition coordinator from when he started secondary school, so around the age of 12, 13, where he spent some time with her talking about the things that were important to him in his life. So it was about him understanding more about his health condition, and it were understanding more about growing up and the kind of skills he wanted to develop to become an independent young man. And it was looking at his dreams and aspirations for the future. So being able to put that all together in one plan, and for the transition coordinator to then introduce Keon to the adult team, to go and visit the hospital, to have to go around and get a feel for what the hospital was like, to meet the new team. Then at the point when we did actually transfer to the adult service, he was much more prepared and felt much more confident in being able to do that. And we developed these, it's called the TCASH, so it's Transition Knowledge and Skills in Healthcare. And we've developed this as a resource that's then being rolled out to other conditions as well, to support young people as they grow up. And I'm more than happy to share these resources with anyone. So then when we finally moved into the adult service, we saw many of the specialists that we saw equivalent to what we saw in the children's team. But obviously, as I've explained, the condition does become more progressive. So there are more tests and more specialists that we need to involve. So we have more cardiac MRIs, lung function tests, CT angiograms. So the tests can become, there's a lot more to do, and the clinics are spread over 3 days for adult clinics. But again, it's nice for adults to be able to come together and socialise in the evening, and then go to the hospital and see the specialist during the daytime as well. We also have roundtable meetings where our patients are fully informed on the research that's developing and on the clinical service, and they have input into what their research priorities are. And if there are any changes to the clinical service or any of the tests that's being carried out, we help to explain that to patients so that they fully understand why certain tests are being done, what the results mean, and hopefully to be able to show that there are possibilities in the future for research. So just to talk a little bit about the impact of Alström syndrome. So dealing with multidisciplinary care, as I talked about, there's the clinics in Birmingham, but also we needed to still remain under the care of many different paediatric doctors and specialists where we live. Coming to terms with dual sensory loss, it's one thing having if you have a visual impairment, then you tend to rely on your hearing and vice versa. But to have dual sensory loss and understand how challenging it can be when you're losing both of those senses. In many ways, it's like a grieving process, losing those senses. And I know my son, he really struggled when he did have some vision. In many ways, I often say the best thing that could have happened to Keon was to lose his sight completely, because when he did, he got on with life then, and he would accept the things that he were rejecting up until that point. So he would start looking at speech on his computers, whereas before he was really struggling to see, as with the little bit of vision that he'd got. He then started to accept equipment and things that might be able to support him with his visual impairment. And now he can touch type. He sends emails. He's doing some volunteer work at the minute during COVID, helping people that live on their own and are experiencing isolation. He's contacting them now to check that they're okay. So I'm really proud of the way that he's come on and developed his skills, and then used those skills to be able to support other people that are classed as vulnerable. There's always been the constant need to manage his diet and his exercise and drug regimes. And that's one of the most challenging things I've found as a parent growing up, because that's the thing on a day-to-day basis we've had to support Keon with. And it's one thing to get my head around that as a parent and understand that I can't give in to my son. I can't give him the extra big biscuits and the kind of things that he's asking me for, because that's not good for his health. But then trying to get other family members on board to support me with that was very difficult. They'd often, Keon's great-grandparents would often look and say, oh, bless him, he can't see, let's give him an extra biscuit. And, and while they understood why I was so strict in doing what I was doing, think they also found that very challenging as well. It's a complex and it's a progressive disease, and that, you know, I think we've learned to live with that now, but that's been very, very challenging, particularly when he was younger. Very little knowledge and awareness of Alström syndrome, as I've said, so we're doing our best to try and help with that. No cure and no game changes on the horizon. We have had 2 clinical trials in the UK. My son's he wasn't eligible to be part of the trials. Unfortunately, they've not had a very, you know, a great impact. It was a start, and we were very pleased to be able to get some clinical trials, but we really hope that further trials will come in future. Experiencing isolation is something that me and Keon, I think, to a certain extent, went through when Keon was younger. Keon's now developed many firm friendships now, whereas that wasn't always the case as he was a young person growing up. But he's now become much more sociable. I think helping Keon to understand his diagnosis has been challenging. So from him being very young, Keon's known that he's got a diagnosis of something called Alström syndrome, and that's why his eyes and his ears don't work the same as other young people. He understands that because of this diagnosis, that's why he couldn't eat the same amount of food and types of food as his peers. So right from being a young age, we've never hidden Alström syndrome from Keon, but then to have to start to talk to him about the prognosis and the complexity of the condition, and for Keon to then be able to have access to the internet and see the same kinds of things that I did when we first got the diagnosis, and, you know, for Keon to then know that some of the people that were diagnosed with the condition were starting to pass away. Keon then, you know, reflected and, you know, and could see that actually he got the same condition as them, and that, you know, seeing him have to come to grips with that has been extremely, extremely challenging. But Keon now will say it's the best condition in the world, and that's because of the network of people and the support he's got from the charity and other people in the UK diagnosed with the condition. He's got a real positive outlook on life now. That's not always been the case, particularly through those years of puberty, but he has got a very positive outlook now, and, you know, thankfully. We've had to manage our thoughts, feelings and relationships throughout this time, and we've had to come to terms with the future. And as I say, it's been a challenge, but there's been so many positives as well. Just a bit about the impact on me as a carer. So as I say, Keon was my first child, and when he was born and went into heart failure, my whole world was completely turned upside down. This was not what I was expecting at all. I was surrounded by families and friends who had healthy pregnancies, and their children were healthy, you know, no issues at all. I wasn't in the rare disease space like I am now. You know, I had no experience of that back then. So it was a complete shock to me. My relationship broke down. I had to resign from work because of Keon's illness. So then, you know, I'd worked from being 13 years old. I'd always provided for myself. So then, and I'd got a good career. I was managing a public house. And so I had to leave that job. I had to become reliant on benefits, and I had to move back home with my parents, which is, you know, I'd not lived with my parents from before I was 18, so that was very difficult. I was in and out of hospital with Keon, but then I was able to get a new home. I met who is now my husband, and we went on to have another child, which is something that was a very difficult decision. But so thankful that I made that decision, and because, you know, my second child made our family complete. I joined the team at Alström Syndrome UK, and I did lots of training and development, and went back in then to progress my own career. So I've not long since now just finished my degree in leadership and management, and I've been able to progress and do more work within the charity and within the rare disease space. Just a little bit about the partnership working that we have now within AS UK. So as I say, I joined the charity. I'm now the National Development Manager. So I'm responsible for managing the Family Support Service. and I also support with our contract with NHS England. So we have a contract to work in partnership with the highly specialised services. So with the clinics that I spoke about, we help with the coordination of those clinics, and we take part in audits to check that that clinic's working as it should be and is in the best interests of patients, and we're continually looking for ways to develop that service. We also take part in research collaboration, where we work with researchers, scientists and our clinicians to look at how we can develop more studies for Alström syndrome to understand the basic mechanism of the condition, and then look for treatments that may make a difference. We also work in partnership with many other patient organisations throughout the UK. So we work with the Celiopathy Alliance. We work. I'm a patient representative on the UK Rare Disease Policy Board, and had involvement in the new Rare Diseases framework that's just been published in the UK. We also do lots of work with umbrella organisations like Genetic Alliance UK, because as a rare condition, if we can't just work on our own. There are so many similarities with other rare disease charities and organisations that we feel it's very important to work together. And that's where we developed the Breaking Down Barriers project, where this is a network of patient organisations, support groups and community networks working together to improve engagement with people from ethnic minority communities. And that's a project that we lead on, because we found that we did a lot of work to improve the diversity of our membership within Alström syndrome UK, and we now have a very diverse patient population, and we wanted to share that learning with others. And we're going to be talking more about breaking down barriers in a panel session on Thursday. So hopefully some of you will be able to join us there. We also work in partnership with pharmaceutical companies. So we've done I did lots of training on drug development when I first started my work at Alström syndrome UK, because even though we didn't have a clinical trial and there were no treatments on the horizon when I started, I really felt it was important to develop our knowledge of drug development. And so I did some training with EuroDis. I attended the EuroDis summer school, and I have to admit, a lot of what I was taught back then, I didn't understand that much of it, and but it was a very good start to be able to help aid my understanding. I was then able to join the paediatric committee at the European Medicines Agency as a patient representative, and join lots of other initiatives to look to make sure that patient input were considered in all those. So when we did get clinical trials in the UK, we were able to work in partnership with a pharmaceutical company to deliver those clinical trials in a very similar model to the way that we deliver our clinical service. And I've also been involved in other global initiatives, such as the CIOMS working group, which is looking at patient involvement in the development and safe use of medicines. So I've just added a research timeline here to show, although it's been slow, and although there are no, game changers on the horizon as such, we've been instrumental in the charity in working with different people to keep the momentum going around research. So we were able to fund a tissue bank, so we've been able to help run the clinical trials. We've set up a patient registry. So we've always done everything we can as a charity to be in the best position possible for if a research or pharmaceutical company comes along to feel that they may have a drug for our condition. We have a database, a very comprehensive database of information on each family in the UK, in the hope that if we do get to that point where we can develop, these new drugs, we're able to support them to do that. And we're also being involved in developing European clinical guidelines for Alström. So although we're based in the UK, they are European guidelines, and then they can be used by any patient globally with Alström syndrome, because unfortunately not everybody's as fortunate as we are in the UK to have the highly specialised service. So many patients in other countries, we try and provide as much support as we can by providing information for them to share with their clinicians. And we've also held our first global conference this year, which was really, really successful. So as I say, I did join the Euro Summer School back in 2008, and then joined lots of other committees and research projects to make sure that patient voice was at the centre of rare disease research. I'm co-applicant now on some NIH, National Institute for Health Research funded projects, and I co-chair different patient and public involvement advisory groups, and always trying to make sure that those advisory groups are representative of the rare disease patient community. Often we find that, I'm from a patient organisation, and I think patient organisations do a wonderful thing a wonderful job of advocating on behalf of their members. What we're trying to do is to make sure that patients themselves also have a voice in those kinds of arenas, and that we also consider the needs of communities where they often don't have their voice heard. So that's where we try to contribute to research. So we have contracts with the pharmaceutical companies, and I've already mentioned SIOMs. I just wanted to share this with you, just a research project that I was involved in, looking at how the different stages where patients can be involved in the development of research projects. Our suggestion would be that patients are involved from the very beginning, and that it should be, we always look for more partnership working, and that everybody values the input that all different stakeholders bring to the table when it comes to research. So if there are researchers and clinicians out there listening to this, I just wanted to talk through why it's important to understand what's important to patients and their families, and how you can help, how you can do that. And first of all, I'd say you need to ask them. It's all around finding outcomes that are particularly important to patients and families, and being aware that priorities may differ. It's so easy to group patient groups and presume that everybody wants the same thing, and that's not always the case. When we look at research priorities within our community, some would say it's research into vision, or some would say it's research into the heart. So it's priorities will differ, but it's important to ask patients first and to consider that. So thinking about the potential improvements in health and quality of life, and what patients and families want to get from that. Identifying and addressing barriers to participation in research. So, we do a lot of work around barriers, in breaking down barriers, looking at language, accessibility, and things like that. So it's important to consider that with any research project. And I think now more than ever, there is that expectation that researchers do engage with patients and the public. But I think there's still, for too long, it's been a tick box exercise, really, or people have known to do it, but just don't know how to do it. But I think, any grant application now, often they usually ask for, they will ask if PPI has been involved, and will want to know how patients have helped develop that research and how they will be consulted. So, I think it's something that people now are recognising is invaluable. So a few top tips in terms of research from me: involve patients and representatives in all stages of research and drug development, and positive engagement from an early stage can support with recruitment and retention in clinical trials. I come at this as a parent, as a carer. Yes, I'm a representative of the charity, but the majority of input I give in this is from my personal experience of living with this condition, well, my son living with this condition. I suggest, I would recommend that people work with patient organisations as they often understand and can advocate the needs of the patient community, and to be involved in PPI advisory panels. And that can be quite intimidating as a carer. My confidence has developed over the years being part of the charity. I remember how I felt back in those early days when there was very little that I understood, but I think, that's okay. We're not, as carers, parents and carers, we're not expected to understand all of the science and all of the research, but neither can the researchers and the scientists understand what it's like to live with a condition as well. So everybody brings something to the table. It's important to manage expectations from the start and to be open and transparent. And that's one of the most difficult things with clinical trials. Anybody being part of a clinical trial and understanding that there may not be a successful drug at the end of it, But I think we need to be open and we need to be transparent about that, and people need to be able to make informed decisions about whether to take part in trials. Looking at the accessibility, as I've said, and patient involvement should not be tokenistic, because we do see straight through people. A meaningful engagement requires commitment from an organisation and not just an individual. Often with the organisations I've come across, the clinicians, the researchers, you always get that one that's fabulous. I've had my son's had a fabulous audiologist all his life, and you always get these odd people that make a real difference to your life. Sometimes, though, that one person needs that support from their organisation if they're really going to make a difference. It's important to plan, monitor and evaluate patient and public involvement, to always look for ways for continuous improvement, and training for patients, patient advocates and researchers and clinicians in PPI is really important. And there's lots of different training packages and programs out there for patient representatives. I know UPATI now is very common. When I started, it was just Eurodis, but now there's Eurodis, there's UPATI, there's lots of different things. And funding value, there is a value on the input that patients and representatives give, and they needed to be reimbursed appropriately. And also considering the needs of young people. I'm talking today from a perspective of a carer. I'm always very keen that people speak directly to my son, and that my son has a voice. He's at an age now where he wants, he speaks for himself and actually gets very angry if anybody tries to speak to me on his behalf. So it's very important to consider the needs of young people, and to understand that the needs of young people sometimes differ from the needs of their parents and carers as well. So it's important to try and find a way of gathering that input from patients and from family members. I just want to say that patients and their representatives have a great deal of knowledge and experience, and many are willing to share this to aid the development of new treatments, and we really do need to find positive ways of working together. But finally, just want to say that life isn't always perfect, it isn't always easy, and it doesn't always make sense, but that's the beauty of life. And my life, my son's life, has been extremely challenging. As I said, when we set out on this journey, it wasn't what I expected that it was going to be at all. But my life is fabulous. My children are my world. And, my son has taught me so many things in life, and he's made me a better person from what he's taught me and from what we've been through and continue to go through together. So, living with a rare condition isn't easy, but I feel so privileged to be part of the rare disease community, and we continue to learn from one another. Rare conditions, we may be few, but together we are many, and we are stronger together. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for sharing that story with us, and it's moving. In the comments and notes here, we have people from really around the globe. I saw people from the UK and Wales that were on here watching your presentation, and thank you for taking the time today to join us here at the 24 hours of rare and sharing that. I can tell you that Eden and I can relate to your story when you were beginning to talk about that travel and you're having to go somewhere with it. We didn't have it to the extent that you did, but 2 or 3 times a year we were loading up, and we were going halfway across the country sometimes to do that. And eventually, Cambria just turned 12 last week, and we ended up physically moving 1,000 miles, relocating our family to the East Coast of the U.S. in order to get that health care. So I admire your bravery and your determination and your tenacity as a rare disease parent and caregiver with this. So thank you so much for your time and the things that you have given to people here today.
Thank you.
We do have a question that came in. It says, How did you roll as a caregiver change when your son transitioned as an adult? Was it a challenge for you to manage that transition as a mom?
Very much so, very much. And working for the charity, I see lots of patients manage transition and transfer very, very differently. So we have some young people that don't understand that much about their condition, and their parents continue to provide a lot of support into adulthood, and that's common with some of these complex conditions. I wanted Keon to be able to have as many opportunities as his peers, really. So while I made the difficult decision to make sure that he was informed about his condition and come to terms with that, but then also really pushed him to develop new skills and to not be reliant on me. I think was as hard for me sometimes as it was for him, because I wanted to wrap him in cotton wool and I wanted to be able to protect him, and and I'd be happy to do that for the rest of his life if I felt that that was in his best interest. But I haven't, and I've wanted him to live an independent life. Although I wanted that, actually doing that is very difficult. I still sometimes want to have that input, and when I can see that he's making decisions that are going to have a negative impact on his health, that it's very difficult not to say anything. I can't not do that as a parent, but it does mean it means that we've had lots of arguments and disagreements, and he is always going to be reliant on me or other people to support him due to the level of his sensory impairment and complex health needs. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be independent. I don't end. I often say this is, because he's 19 now, this is one times of our life, going through this stage, moving to adulthood. Obviously the time he was in life support as a baby was the most difficult, but me understanding that I need to back off and I need to let him live his life, and I need to let him make some mistakes. Not easy to do.
No, I can see that.
I have to say, very proud of what he's achieved as well. When I see, I didn't expect him to, I've always had high expectations for him, but to see what he's achieving now, I'm full of pride for that. So I talk about it being hard and being complex, but I'm proud.
Yeah, and thank you for talking about some of the the mental health challenges that are for the patient are there, but the mental health challenges are for the caregiver too. It's intense from time to time, because it's not, you can't look at that from a very unemotional standpoint as that caregiver when you're the parent, because you love them and you want the best for them, and there's no removing that emotional component from it, with the mental health portion of it, and to be able to recharge and bond with other people is so critical. So, Carrie, thank you. I can see from some of the comments that people have made that very positive, and thank you for giving the presentation. Thank you for sharing with us today. It is just, it's been awesome to have you here.
Thank you.
For everyone coming up in just a little bit here, we are going to, in just about 15 minutes, actually, we're going to be having a panel that is going to be reporting on caregiving, and it's going to be sponsored by Orchard Therapeutics. So we hope that you will join us at the 10:30 hour, wherever you are in the world, and hear from some fantastic people there. Carrie, thank you again. Look forward to staying connected with you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.